Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with the Mishna Yomi, Masechet Ketubot. We are up to Perek Zayin, Mishnah Zayin. Today's Mishnayot should be Leru Nishmat, Neria ben Svetlana, Alayev, Eliyahu ben Burcha Israelov, and Chana bad Miriam, Menuchatam began Eden, Amen. And Leavdi ben Chaim Lechaim, with the Refuah Shelemav Daniel Shalom ben Rosa, Mitok Shah Chulei Israel. The Mishnah begins, Amkadeshet Aishal Menat Shenele Nedarim. If one betroths a woman on condition that she is not under any vows, meaning he stipulated that his act of Erusin is valid only if his bride is not restricted by vows, and it is then discovered that she is in fact under vows that most husbands would find objectionable. For example, she had vowed that she would not eat meat or drink wine, or that she will not wear colored clothes. And a husband would object to such vows because by afflicting herself in these ways, she makes herself unattractive to him. As Rashi explains on page 72b in Masechet Ketubot, and the Rav says only vows of this type rendered the betrothal invalid. Now, although he mentioned vows in general and did not specify any particular type, the Tosfot explains, we assume that he had in mind only those that a typical husband would deem unacceptable. The Mishnah says, and not mikudeshet, in this case, she is not betrothed. Since the betrothal was done conditionally and the condition was not met, it is completely void. She may marry another man even without receiving a get or a divorce document. The Mishnah addresses an ordinary case of marriage where the husband made no such condition. If he married her without making this condition, and it was then discovered that she is under vows, she can be divorced without a ketubah, but she must receive a get. The husband has the right to divorce her and not pay her ketubah because he can claim they never wanted to marry a woman who was restricted by vows, even though they did not say so at the time. On the other hand, a get is needed because it is possible that at the time of the marriage he had no objection to a wife with vows, and he is changing his mind now. Since the marriage is possibly valid, she may not marry again unless she receives a get. Although the Mishnah says that he married her nisuin, the same law applies where he only also betrothed her erusin without making the conditions. By mentioning marriage, the Mishnah teaches that even if he performed both acts, erusin and nisuin, without the condition, he still does not need to pay the ketubah. In a similar situation, al menat shen bah mumin, if one betroths the woman on condition that she does not have any physical defects, v'nimtzu bah mumin, and it was then discovered that she does have defects, and nah mikudeshes, she is not betrothed at all, and no get is required. Kinasah stam, however, if he betrothed and married her without making this condition, v'nimtzu bah mumin, and it was then discovered that she had defects, teshesh shelo b'chtubah, she can be divorced without a ketubah, but she needs a get. And the Mishnah states which types of defects make a marriage invalid. Kol ha'mumina postin b'chohanim postin b'nashim. All the physical defects that disqualify kohanim from serving in the Beit HaMikdash disqualify women with regard to marriage. The defects that disqualify kohen are listed in Sefer Vayikra, chapter 21, verses 18 to 20, and the 7th chapter of Masechet Bechorot. The Gemara adds several defects that do not disqualify kohen, but are nevertheless considered defects with regard to marriage. Now, that is an Abotai Mishnah Zayin. To recap, Mishnah Zayin taught that if a man married a woman who has physical defects, he can divorce her without paying a ketubah, and if he had made the marriage conditional on her not having defects, not even a get is required. Now, this law, however, applies only where the defects existed before the betrothal they were seen. If they developed after she was betrothed, he must pay the ketubah. This Mishnah, Mishnah Chet, addresses a case in which it is unknown when they developed. Hayu bah mumin ve'odah bevet aviyah. If defects were first found in her when she was still a na'ara. Now the Mishnah speaks of a na'ara who is under her father's jurisdiction until she completes the marriage process with nisuin. If a na'ara is divorced before nisuin, it is the father who receives the get and the ketubah. So again, if defects were first found in her when she was still a na'ara living in her father's home, meaning during the period of betrothal, and it is not known whether they existed before the betrothal, in which case the husband does not need to pay the ketubah, or they developed after the betrothal, in which case he must pay. The laws as follows. The father of the na'ara needs to bring proof that these defects developed after she was betrothed. When his field, so to speak, flooded, meaning the defects are a result of the husband's bad luck. Since the defects developed after he betrothed, the husband has only his bad luck to blame, and he must bear the loss. It can be compared to a person who bought a field that was then flooded by heavy rain. It is his misfortune that the field was ruined, and he has no claim against the seller. So similarly, in our case, It is the husband's misfortune that his wife developed defects once they were married, and he remains fully obligated to pay her ketubah. In order to claim the ketubah, the father must prove, however, that the bride did not have the defects until after the betrothal. If he is unable to prove this, the ketubah is not paid. Since the ketubah money is in the husband's possession, the father of the bride cannot collect it unless he proves that it is his. This is an application of the rule, the burden of proof is on the one who seeks to collect from his fellow. Now the Mishnah's ruling seems to contradict the rule of chazakah, which states that a person or thing is assumed to remain the same until we know that it's changed. Applied to our case, this rule tells us that since the bride was born without defects, she was still in that state when she was betrothed, and that the defects developed later. According to the majority opinion in chapter 1, Mishnah 6, a chazakah of this type even suffices to make the husband pay the ketubah. So why then does our Mishnah rule that the husband does not have to pay? The Gemara on page 75b in Masechet Ketubot answers that there is a legal assumption which states that if we do not know when a change occurred, it presumably occurred in the same domain as the one in which it was discovered. Kan nimtza kanaya. Here it is found, here it was. In the Mishnah's case, this means that since the defects were first found during the period of betrothal when the bride was still in her father's domain, we must strongly consider the possibility that they were present the entire time that she was in his domain, even before the betrothal. This is enough to weaken the father's claim and to prevent him from taking money out of the husband's possession. The Mishnah continues, Nichnesa l'rshut haba'al. However, if the defects were first found in her after she entered her husband's domain, meaning performed nisuin, haba'al tzarich la'avir raya. The husband needs to bring a proof she'ad shrit arsa yu bah mumin elu, that these defects existed before she was betrothed. Vayam mikro mekach ta'ut, and therefore his purchase was a mistaken one, meaning the betrothal was made under false pretenses, which would mean that if it never took effect and he does not owe her a ketubah. In this case, where the defects were discovered after the nisuin, the burden of proof is on the husband. He must pay unless he can prove that they already existed before the betrothal. Divri b'meir, these are the words of Rav Meir. Now just to explain, the legal assumption that we mentioned works in the father's favor here. What we said, kanim sakanaya, here it is found, here it was. If the defects were discovered when the wife was already in the domain of the husband after nisuin, we assume that it also developed when she was in his domain. The husband therefore cannot claim that the defects existed before the betrothal and that the betrothal was made under false pretenses. Again, these are the words of Rabbi Meir. The sages, however, limit a husband's ability to make any claim about physical defects. The sages say, in what cases does this ruling apply? Meaning, when can a husband claim that the marriage is invalid because he found that his wife has physical defects? He can make such a claim only regarding defects are in hidden parts of the body. Since he would have not been aware of hidden defects, it is up to the bride's family to tell him about them. If they did not do so, he can claim that they tricked him into marrying her. But regarding defects in exposed parts of her body, he cannot claim that he was tricked because he presumably noticed them and still decided to marry her. And if there is a public bathhouse in that city where she lives, he cannot make a claim even regarding hidden defects because he can presumably examine her. He presumably examined her through his female relatives, meaning his female relatives would have seen her defects and told him of them. And that is the Rabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen.